I knew the second she leaned over my fence with her knockoff designer sunglasses, and that signature sour look that something was about to go sideways. "Walter," she said, drawing out my name like it offended her tongue, "your koi pond is a violation of Regulation 14A, standing water that attracts pests." I looked up from my rake, sweat dripping down my temple. "It's a pond, Victoria, with a filtration system and koi. Not a swamp." Victoria Cranley, the queen of our HOA board. Blonde bob, permanent frown, and a voice that always sounded like she was 2 syllables away from calling the police. She'd been gunning for me ever since I refused to vote for the new HOA budget that included a $10,000 beautification fund that conveniently gave her control over everyone's lawn color. She sniffed once, then turned on her heel and strutted off like she'd won something. I should have known she wasn't done. 2 days later, I came home from a double shift. I'm a hospital maintenance supervisor, long hours, 0 patients, and caught the smell before I even reached my backyard. Something was wrong. I rushed to the pond. The water was cloudy, murky. My koi, 7 of them, each with names my daughter Nicole had given them when she was still in elementary school, were floating belly up. I stood there, frozen. Rage didn't hit me immediately. Grief did. Those fish weren't just pets. They were part of our home, our peace. I checked the filter. Still running. No signs of a leak. Then I saw it, white residue along the edge of the rocks. Like powder. Chemical. I didn't tell Victoria. I didn't curse her out. I didn't even storm over to her pristine porch with her stupid HOA clipboard nailed to her hip. I just went inside, printed out the footage from my back security camera, and called environmental services. Because see, I'd installed that camera 3 months ago. Right after she tried to fine me for having a non-regulation wind chime, and there she was, clear as day. 2 nights ago, just after midnight, creeping into my yard with a pair of gloves and a bottle of something that had a skull on it. She sprinkled it all over the pond, looked around, then walked off like it was just another Tuesday. I handed the footage over with a printed timestamp and a signed incident report. The agent who took the report didn't even try to hide his disgust. "Looks like she used tricloper," he said. "That stuff's toxic, illegal to dump near water features. Especially if it drains into the city runoff." "She's the head of our HOA," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Huh, that'll make the fine even heavier." Victoria had no idea what was coming. The knock came just after dawn, 3 quick raps, firm and deliberate. I opened the door to find 2 officers standing on my porch. One wore a navy windbreaker with the city seal stitched above the breast pocket. The other had a badge clipped to his belt and a clipboard in hand. "Walter Briggs?" the one with the clipboard asked. I nodded. "That's me. We're with the city's Department of Environmental Enforcement. We reviewed your footage and ran tests on the pond water. We need to ask you a few more questions and collect a couple of follow-up samples." I stepped aside without a word. They moved quickly, professionally. The one with the badge, Detective Louis Morneau, according to his ID, headed straight for the backyard. The other, a woman named Janice, crouched near the pond with a vial and a long glass pipette. "You found traces of tricloper?" I asked, watching her work. "More than traces," she said. "Levels this high indicate a deliberate application. Someone poured nearly a full quart of commercial-grade herbicide into this water." Louis glanced at me. "Do you know if she had access to any chemicals like that?" "She runs a landscaping business on the side," I said. "No license, just does it under the table for a few of the board members." Janice exchanged a look with him. "That explains how she got her hands on the concentrate. Commercial suppliers usually require a certification." "She's got friends," I said. "And they all think they're untouchable." Louis flipped through the pages on his clipboard. "We'll verify whether she's applied for any pesticide handling permits. If not, she's in violation of multiple municipal codes, including unsafe chemical disposal and destruction of private property. And animal cruelty," Janice added, pointing to the pond. 7 ornamental fish, that's a felony under city statute." I didn't say anything, I just stared at the water. Nicole had named one of them after her favorite book character. She was going to be heartbroken when she got home from school. Lewis tapped his pen against the edge of the clipboard. We've already served a warrant to collect chemical samples from her garage. If it matches the compound in your pond, the city will press charges. They left 20 minutes later, taking water samples, photos, and a written statement with them. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning out the pond and trying not to think about Victoria's smug face. That afternoon, the neighborhood group chat exploded. I wasn't in it, of course, but my neighbor, Reggie, works from home and keeps his ears open. She's losing it, he told me when I stepped outside for some air. Apparently, she found out about the investigation this morning and tried to delete the HOA's financial records from the clubhouse computer. I raised an eyebrow. Why would she do that? He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Because she used HOA funds to buy the herbicide. Ordered it under the landscaping budget. My jaw clenched. You're kidding. Nope. One of the board members, Deanne, just quit over it. Said she had no idea Victoria was using the HOA account for personal vendettas. I looked across the street. Victoria's curtains were drawn, but I could see shadows moving behind them. She was in there, pacing probably, trying to dig her way out. Reggie flipped the page in his notebook. Oh, and get this, she billed the HOA twice. Once for the weed control compound she dumped in your pond, and again for a consultation fee with a non-existent landscaping expert. I blinked. That's embezzlement. Yup, he said, popping the P. And if the city doesn't nail her for environmental violations, the financial fraud unit sure will. That night, the board held an emergency meeting in the community center. Officially, it was just a review of current HOA operations. Unofficially, it was a civil war. I showed up early, sat in the back, and kept my mouth shut. I didn't need to say anything. The city officers did that for me. Janice arrived first, followed by two others from the Department of Environmental Enforcement. Then came Detective Morneau, with a stack of documents thicker than a law textbook. Victoria was already seated at the front, flanked by two of the last loyal members of the board. Her posture was stiff, hands folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes darted to the doors every few seconds. When Morneau stepped up to the podium, the room went dead silent. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we're here tonight because we have substantial evidence that your HOA president, Victoria Cranley, committed multiple infractions that violate both city and state law. He didn't sugarcoat it. He laid out everything. The chemical match between her garage stash and the pond water, the video footage, the misuse of HOA funds, and the fraudulent invoices she submitted. Victoria's mouth tightened. This is absurd. That footage was taken without my consent. It's inadmissible. Morneau didn't even blink. You were on private property committing a crime. The camera is well within Mr. Briggs's legal rights, and the footage has already been entered into evidence. One of the board members, a lanky man named Charles, leaned forward. Are you saying she used our landscaping budget to poison someone's property? I'm saying, Morneau said, flipping to a page in his stack, that she used HOA resources to procure and apply an unlicensed chemical agent with the intent to destroy private property. That's felony vandalism, unlawful chemical disposal, animal cruelty, and financial misconduct. The room erupted, voices overlapped, some demanded her resignation. Others asked how long this had been going on. A few just sat in stunned silence. Victoria stood abruptly. This is a coordinated attack. You're all just taking his word over mine. He's been defying regulations for months. Janice stepped forward with a folded document. This is the violation report from Environmental Services. You'll see that the only regulation broken was yours. By the time the meeting ended, she was suspended pending investigation. An interim president was appointed. Diane, the board member who walked out earlier. Outside the center, the crowd lingered, buzzing with disbelief. Reggie joined me near the parking lot. You really caught the queen bee in her own hive. I shook my head. I didn't catch her. She exposed herself. I just made sure the city saw it," he laughed. "Well, she's looking at a 5-figure fine and a potential criminal trial. Not bad for a guy with a rake and a security cam." I didn't laugh. I was too tired, too angry, too done with the games. The next morning, I received a call from the city attorney's office. They were officially filing charges. A court date would be assigned within the week. I'd be asked to testify. I said I'd be there, and I would be. Every step of the way. 2 days after the emergency board meeting, I got a letter from the city attorney's office hand-delivered in a sealed envelope. Not a notice, not a summons, an official request to provide further testimony alongside a forensic environmental scientist. The city wasn't just filing charges, they were building a rock-solid case. I sat on my porch reading the letter with a mug of black coffee gone cold, the morning sun barely cutting through the haze that had settled over our neighborhood. Word had spread fast. Some of the residents were still in disbelief. Others, the ones who'd butted heads with Victoria before, were practically giddy in their relief. I hadn't seen her all week. Her car was still parked in the driveway, but the lights in her windows stayed off most nights, curtains shut, mail piling up. No HOA notices stuck to anyone's doors, no passive-aggressive flyers about lawn edges or mailbox paint. It was like the neighborhood had exhaled for the first time in 5 years. That afternoon, I met with the city's legal team. They'd set up shop in a repurposed municipal building downtown, inside a room that smelled like old printer toner and floor wax. The lead attorney, a woman named Marielle Grant, wore a navy blazer and an expression that suggested she'd dismantled tougher cases blindfolded. "We've got enough to move this forward," she said, sorting through a stack of documents. "But we want to present a pattern of behavior. Abuse of authority, targeted harassment, deliberate misuse of funds. You mentioned she's been fining residents for made-up infractions. She fined my neighbor for having a hanging basket 1 inch too low," I said. "And that same week, she approved a pergola for her friend that was 6 inches over height. No vote, no notice." Marielle glanced at her paralegal. "Get statements from other residents. Focus on inconsistencies in enforcement." Her colleague nodded and started typing. "We're also submitting a request to audit the HOA's financials for the past 3 years," Marielle added. "If she's done this once, she's done it before." I leaned forward. "You think she's been laundering money?" "I think she's been using the HOA as her personal piggy bank," she said. "And we're about to crack it open." I signed a few more documents, gave a statement that would be entered into public record, and left the building feeling like I'd just stepped out of a courtroom drama. Only this wasn't TV. And the damage she'd done to my pond, my peace, the whole neighborhood was very real. By the end of the week, forensic accountants had uncovered over $30,000 in unapproved expenditures, all funneled through vaguely labeled budget lines like seasonal maintenance and community enhancement. The kicker: most of the vendors she'd paid didn't exist. Dummy companies that traced back to a P.O. box in another county. All registered under one name, her son's. The police got involved again, this time with a white-collar crimes unit. Detective Morneau returned to the neighborhood, this time in plain clothes, accompanied by a young officer with a digital camera and a whole lot of questions. "She's got a shell setup running through her kid," Morneau said as we stood by my now empty pond. "Looks like he opened a fake lawn care business, and she's been funneling HOA money through it for nearly 2 years. She always said she was saving us money," I muttered. Morneau snorted. "Yeah. Saving it for herself." That evening, a city-issued notice was taped to the front of Victoria's house. "Notice of investigation, do not remove." A second one went up on the HOA community center. Underneath it, someone had scribbled in blue ink, "Finally." The interim HOA president, Deanne, called an open meeting the next day to discuss next steps. Unlike the last one, this wasn't a circus. It was a reckoning. "We've contacted a property law mediator," she said, her voice wavering slightly as she addressed the gathered homeowners. "They'll help us restructure the board and draft a new charter, one with oversight, one that prevents this from ever happening again." A man in the second row raised his hand. "What about the money? Are we getting any of it back?" Marielle, who had joined as a legal advisor, answered that one. "We've frozen her accounts. Once the investigation concludes, restitution will be part of sentencing. If convicted, she'll be required to repay the HOA in full." "And the pond?" someone else asked. I stood. "I'll rebuild it. Nicole and I already started sketching plans." Deanne smiled faintly. "We'll make sure the HOA covers the cost, as a gesture of good faith." The room nodded. No objections, no debate. Just quiet agreement, the kind that comes from watching a bully finally get caught in the light. The next morning, Victoria was arrested. It wasn't dramatic. No sirens, no shouting. Just two unmarked cars pulling up to her home, two officers walking up the drive, and a short conversation on the porch. She stepped outside wearing a beige sweater and a look that was more stunned than angry. Like the full weight of what she'd done had only just hit her. They cuffed her. Read her rights. Walked her down the path she'd once used to scold residents for planting the wrong kind of hydrangeas. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, not out of spite, but to make sure it was real. An hour later, a moving truck arrived. Her son came to pack up her belongings. He didn't speak to anyone, just kept his head down and loaded box after box into the truck. No one offered to help. By the end of the week, the house was empty. The interim board voted to list it as a community-owned property until the court ruled on asset recovery. Most of us figured it would eventually go to auction, but no one really cared. The important part was that she was gone. A month later, I stood in court and gave my testimony. Nicole sat in the gallery, hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on the judge. I told them what happened, what I saw, what I lost. Victoria didn't look at me once. The verdict came in after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: felony misuse of community funds, environmental violation, animal cruelty, and fraud. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 3. Restitution was ordered immediately. Her assets, including the fake landscaping company and her personal savings, were seized. The HOA used part of the recovered funds to install new security systems around the neighborhood and fund a community garden. The rest went into an account controlled by the newly restructured board, with spending subject to quarterly reviews and mandatory resident approval. I rebuilt the koi pond. This time bigger, with new filtration, a deeper basin, and a stone walkway that Nicole helped design. The first weekend it was finished, half the neighborhood showed up to see it. Reggie brought lemonade. Deanne brought a folding table full of cupcakes and a stack of petitions for new community bylaws. The pond gleamed in the sunlight, clear and calm. Nicole knelt by the edge and tapped the water with one finger. A sleek orange koi slid through the shallows and nudged her hand. She looked up at me. "This one's name is Ember," I nodded. "Perfect." Behind us, someone laughed. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like home again, and not a single clipboard in sight. It was late fall when the city finally dispersed the restitution funds. I got the call on a Thursday morning while I was replacing a utility relay in the hospital's sub-basement. The city accountant's voice crackled through the weak reception, confirming the transfer had been completed, full reimbursement for the damages to my property, plus a small settlement for emotional distress and loss of non-replaceable property. I didn't argue. Nicole had already accepted the koi were gone. She was busy these days helping design a mural for the side of the community center, part of the neighborhood's new outreach effort. The old boardroom, the one Victoria used to lock during executive sessions, had been converted into an open art space for local kids. By December, the frost had crept into the corners of the lawn, and the pond sat dormant beneath a mesh cover. I'd installed a submersible heater to keep the new koi safe through the winter. Nicole had named them after constellations this time. She said they deserved something bigger than just fantasy novels. One evening after work, I was in the garage sorting through some of my old toolboxes when my neighbor Reggie came jogging up the driveway. He wasn't out of breath, but his expression was tight. "Walter, you need to come by the community center," he said. Something weird came up at the budget oversight meeting. I wiped my hands on a rag and followed him. The center was still lit, even though the meeting had officially ended an hour earlier. Deanne and Charles were inside, seated on either side of a folding table stacked with manila envelopes. The air smelled faintly of printer ink and cold metal. "We were cross-referencing the vendor history from the last 5 years," Deanne said without looking up. "Turns out, a lot of the maintenance work Victoria claimed was done never actually happened. No permits, no invoices from the contractors. Just approval memos signed by her and one other name." Charles slid a sheet across the table to me. "Look at the authorizing signature." I leaned down. The second name was inked in shaky cursive, Clarence G. Cranley, her father. "She told us he was a retired building inspector," Deanne said. "Turns out he died 6 years ago." I stared at the document. "You're saying she forged his signature?" "More than once," Charles replied. "We found at least a dozen approvals for projects that never happened: tree removal, sidewalk repairs, even a roof replacement on her own house, all signed by a man who wasn't alive to hold a pen." I stepped back and ran a hand over my face. "Did you report it?" Deanne nodded. "We sent everything to the DA's office this morning. They called back an hour ago. They're launching an investigation into posthumous document fraud." "She's already serving time," I said quietly. "Why would they go after this too?" "Because it's a separate crime," said a voice from the door. Detective Morneau walked in, coat dusted with snow, a worn leather folder tucked under his arm. "There's more," he said, setting the folder on the table. "We traced the fictitious vendors further back. Turns out some of the fake invoices were used to launder money into a personal trust. One that she set up under her daughter's name." Reggie leaned against the wall. "So she wasn't just stealing, she was planning to pass it down." "Exactly," Morneau said. "And because the trust was funded using falsified HOA invoices, that's wire fraud, federal territory." Deanne looked stunned. "Will that affect the restitution?" "No," Morneau said. "But it opens the door for additional victims to come forward. Anyone who lost money due to her fake assessments or manipulated fines may be eligible for compensation." I folded my arms. "How do we prove who paid what?" Charles tapped his laptop. "I've been building a resident ledger, cross-referencing bank statements with HOA charges. Anyone who paid more than the standard dues will be flagged for review." Morneau stepped closer to me. "You know, this case started with your koi pond. Most people would have just cleaned it out and moved on." "I don't like bullies," I said. He nodded. "Well, you brought down an entire fraud ring." "Might not have been what you planned, but the DA is calling it one of the most extensive HOA-related embezzlement cases in the state." I didn't say anything. I just looked at the folder full of forged signatures, dummy invoices, and lies and felt a strange sort of relief. Not happiness, not pride. Just quiet closure. A month later, I was called back to court not as a witness this time, but as part of a citizen advisory panel. The judge overseeing Victoria's case wanted community input before sentencing on the new charges. The courtroom was smaller than the first one. No cameras. No reporters. Just a few rows of chairs, a tired bailiff, and a woman in an orange jumpsuit sitting behind a thick pane of glass. Victoria looked older. Her hair had gone gray at the roots, and the sharp lines around her mouth had deepened. She didn't speak, not once. Not even when the judge listed the charges: wire fraud, forgery, misappropriation of public funds, and obstruction of a municipal investigation. The new sentence was added to her current term. Another 6 years, no parole. Her assets were seized again, this time including the trust she'd tried to hide. After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into the brittle winter sun. Deanne was waiting on the steps, wrapped in a thick coat and holding a paper cup of tea. "They're naming the new garden after your daughter's koi," she said. "You okay with that?" I glanced over at her. "Which name?" "Ember," she said. The first one she picked, I smiled. "Yeah, that's perfect." That spring, the garden opened. It stretched behind the community center, where the old maintenance shed used to sit. Raised beds lined with stone, a koi-shaped wind sculpture at the center. Nicole painted the sign herself, each letter in a different hue, outlined in gold. The new board held monthly forums now. Open to all residents. No closed-door decisions, no surprise citations. The HOA charter had been rewritten from scratch with input from a volunteer legal team. Every dollar spent was posted online, every vote recorded. Neighbors who used to keep their heads down started showing up to plant flowers, paint benches, and share ideas for improvement. The place changed, not overnight but slowly, like spring thaw melting frostbitten ground. One afternoon, Nicole and I were walking past the pond when she stopped and crouched beside the edge. "Do you think they remember me?" she asked, looking at the new koi gliding beneath the surface. "They know you take care of them," I said. "That's what matters." She nodded, then stood and took my hand. Behind us, kids laughed in the garden and someone strummed a guitar near the mural. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was ours again. Honest, open, stronger than it had been before. And no one, not a clipboard tyrant, not a forged signature, not even a bottle of poison could take that away from us.